Our talk tonight is from Bethel to Bethel, and it's about the testing of faith. So the talks really aren't about so much, as we said last time, the talks aren't so much about the promises and the covenant that was made with Abram, though more what is underlying those things, and that is the faith of Abram and Sarai, or Abraham and Sarah. So, last week we looked at faith demonstrated, and so it's just these slides are just showing that it's about the development of faith, and so we're going to see that tonight, the testing of their faith, Abram and Sarai's faith, and then we want to just next time just look at how Sarah's faith was nurtured and the circumstances that occurred in her life, so that she could actually be able to conceive and bring forth Isaac. And then last of all, we want to look at the perfecting of faith, and of course that's Abram's offering of Isaac. And when you're able to perhaps think about those things and look at them as a span, you see how that faith began. We'll see that tonight when it was tested, what the measure of that faith was. But as that faith developed in their lives, and that was probably over a period, well, first of all, in the first 25 years, but when we come to the offering of Isaac, of course, we'll have to add another 33 and a half years to that. So it's, whatever that is. So, how many is it, Steve?
133 and a half.
133 and a half. So 75 to 133. And when he reaches that point in his life, what happens at that point in his life, and you see it when you think about it, and that is that God reveals to him exactly what he's going to do in the offering of his son, the exact place, and he allows Abram to enter into the fullness of that offering. And when Abram does that, it's because he's not withheld anything from God whatsoever. Now I know you've withheld nothing from me. And he gives him the kingdom right there. That's it. I'm going to swear an oath, and I can confirm that upon you. So there's the development of that faith, and we want to see this tonight that that for us it's not something that's unobtainable. So last week we just looked in. Remember, I just want to spend just a quick moment. We looked at the importance and extent of the Abrahamic covenant. We said, look, the Abrahamic covenant is simple enough to be understood at the most basic level of first principle, and the belief in the Abrahamic covenant and its basis and how it extends out into the Davidic covenant. A person understands those things and is able to make a good confession of that before baptism. That's a beginning. But because it's also the means by which God is going to fill the earth with his glory, it's the very vehicle by which that is going to occur, then of course it's got depth in it as well. A depth that we can get lost in the depth of that, because of course it's the covenant that's ratified with the sacrifice of the Son of God. And we saw that was a reversal of the effects of the Tower of Babel. The nations were scattered across the face of the earth. The nations were divided, and the people were divided into nations, families, and by language. And of course, the Abrahamic covenant comes in, and there's going to be a blessing upon the families of the earth. All nations are going to be blessed in the seed of Abram. And when we come into Revelation 5, of course, there are the 24 elders, the king priests, are from every tongue, nation, and family. They're all Abram's seed. And when you come to the end of the millennial age, by definition in Revelation 24, because of just a statement there, I will be their God, straight out of the Abrahamic covenant, there is the extent of it. Because they're all, when we come to the end of the millennial age, everybody that's left upon the earth in that are all, apart from of course before Abram, are all the seed of Abram. Of course, when we go to the judgment seat, it's really just going to be, and looking at it from that point of view, it's going to be simply a division. Who are Abram's seed? And the reason why they're Abram's seed, remember, is because they have believed in me, God says. They have believed in what I promised. That's the basis of the Abrahamic covenant. It's a belief in what God has promised, and so it's what's driving that individual's life when they get up in the morning. That it drives the person forward because it's belief in promise. So Abram's our father because he's the father of all that believe, both Jew and Gentile alike. And we looked at that divine advice in Isaiah 51 about if you're pursuing righteousness, then look to Abram, your father, because you'll notice that I called him. There was the foundation of his faith. That's what's right behind an individual's life. With the faith of Abram, right behind that individual is Yahweh himself. I called him. There's the basis and foundation of his faith. That's the rock from whence he's been hewn. And I blessed him. He believed what I said, something that was humanly impossible. Your seed's going to be like the stars of heaven for multitude. He believed in Yahweh that he would perform that, he would do that. So I imputed righteousness to him. I just said, you're righteous. And God calls that there in Isaiah 51, right through to Isaiah 54, it's my righteousness, he says, which I bestow upon an individual, and that righteousness is forever. And that's what the covenant is about. It's about promise. And it's about faith, our belief. And so when we come now to our talk tonight, it's about that belief being tested. So we saw Abram's call. We saw his response out of that was his obedience. And like Paul calls that in Romans, at each end of Romans, it's the obedience of faith. Remember, we sing at him about the rock on which we stand. It's the rock of obedience, and it's obedience that springs out of faith and promise. That obedience. And Paul starts Romans by saying, look, that's the power of God unto salvation. You know, when we think about it, brothers and sisters, when we meet on Sunday mornings and we're thinking about what's been done on our behalf, and we're exercising our mind upon what's been accomplished. We'll talk about that again in a moment. That's the power of God unto salvation. Belief in that. It's a transforming belief. And of course, he says there that it's from faith to faith. It springs from, and when it means from faith to faith, and he quotes out of Habakkuk, it means it comes from Yahweh's, it's his faithfulness to works of faith. That's where that's you know, you can express it in that way there. It's from that faithfulness. That's why we sung hymn 88 tonight. Great is thy faithfulness. So those are things. So there's this basis of faith as a way of life. So when we come now back to the record here in Genesis chapter 12, and we just start there, we just want to add some detail. Of course, Abram's had the promises outlined to him. But when we come there, and in verse 4, we see Abram departs as Yahweh has spoken to him. See, there's his obedience. So he departs, he takes Sarai and Lot and so forth, and all the substance they've gained, and the souls that they've gained in Haran and Damascus, and they come into the land of Canaan. So, and we just want to come to verse 6. And so he passes through the land and he comes to Shechem. So we know, everyone knows Shechem there, it's considered to be sort of the centre of the land. So he's in the centre of the land. Now it just says here that Yahweh appears unto him there. And of course, we don't know in what way that God appeared unto him. It's the details not there. When he was in Ur, it was the God of glory that appeared unto him. Here we're just told that Yahweh appeared unto him. And he says there, unto your seed I'm going to give this land. And so he builds an altar there unto Yahweh who appeared unto him. So he makes this promise now. He's entered into the land and he tells them, look, unto thy seed I'm going to give this land. Now this is going to come out in our talk tonight, and it's one of the driving lessons of what we want to see tonight. Now I want to ask you this question. I want you to think about this. When you look into your own heart, into your own, and look into your inner being, and you ask yourself the question, when Yahweh appears unto Abram here in Shechem, he says, I'm going to give this land to your seed. When you immediately think of that, who do you think it's talking about? Because that's something only that all of us will can answer that question for ourselves. But the question that we want to see and we want to build out of our class tonight is we want to say it's my Lord. For each one of us to be able to say that. Because you see, when you stop and think about it, who else should receive the land first? The promise of it. Not us. But the one who made the inheritance possible. And we would want to express that in our hearts. Our belief in that. The one among 1,000. And you see, and it's only his work that will allow us to inherit. You know, in the future, it talks about the prince's portion. The prince, his portion. And that's, we want to come back to this later in our talk tonight. We want to see how important that is in our own lives. Because this is what this section, we're going to see, this is what this section is actually about. So Abram builds an altar there. So you see, he builds an altar, and so here at Shechem is a place of worship. This is what we want, you see, we want to just talk about what that means for a moment as a foundation. So he builds an altar there, and of course, you know, like sometimes you might read a commentary and they say, oh, he built an altar, but it doesn't say anything about offering. But, you know, like, you wouldn't build an altar and not offer upon it. And you see, building an altar and offering upon it was something that was absolutely familiar to Abram's household. And we know that it was familiar to Abram's household because in Genesis 22, Isaac says to Abram, his father, look, here's the wood. Well, you know, I can't quite, you know, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? Where did you get that idea from? Because he got it from the fact that it was something that was commonplace in the tents of Abram. And so he builds an altar here, and you know, on what basis is he worshipping? And you see, the thing is, it has to be on the basis of Genesis 3:15. That is that there will be the provision of a deliverer. There will be a provision of a saviour who will come. There will be the provision of the deliverer. That's out of Genesis chapter 3 verse 15. We know we can go back and we go, well, by faith Abel offered. So Abel offers on the basis of Genesis chapter 3 verse 15. I mean, Dr. Thomas, he spells that out in Alpha Israel. This was the hope from the very beginning, the promise of this deliverer who would come forth, and by faith Abel therefore offered a more fuller offering, because his offering was based upon the promise of the one who was going to deliver, and it was by faith that he offered. And it was because of that that offering was accepted. So by faith they are offering here at Shechem, means between the shoulders. You know, you think about that. He's offering here, speaking about a deliverer, and the very place that he's offering it is talking about the burden bearer. And Yahweh laid upon him the iniquity of us all. So here's Abram building an altar. He's worshipping Yahweh. And he's worshipping Yahweh on the basis of the provision of a future deliverer. And now Abram knows that the land in which he's standing has been promised to him for an inheritance. You can just draw that out of that verse. Because you see, when we've got the record here, of course, we can't just read over it. Oh, you built an altar at Shechem. You know, we just read over the record, but we don't go and think about the implication of what that means. And of course, the implication is that he understood quite clearly Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. It's implied. So here's something else here. His understanding of Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. But then you see what happens is you notice then he removes from thence, and he comes to a mountain between Bethel and Ai. Now notice what the record says, and this is what happens when you keep going back over the record and you're reading it over and over again. You see what it says there in verse 8. He removed from thence unto the mountain of the east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent. He stretched his tent there. Well, why does it say that? I mean, he must have obviously stretched his tent at Shechem. So he stretched his tent here. He spreads his tent, and it's between Bethel and Ai. And we know that that's the house of God, and Ai means ruin. He's between those two places. And now see what he does there. He builds an altar unto Yahweh again. But notice what it says here. It says, and now he's calling upon the name of Yahweh. What does that mean? So we're told here. Now, so I just want to spend a couple of minutes just going and just explaining here what that means. See, so if you come over to Psalm 116, this is a psalm, possibly a psalm of Hezekiah. Psalm 116. It's a messianic psalm. And it's also got the spirit of David in it. Now you come over to Psalm 116 because we've got this phrase to call upon the name of Yahweh is right through this psalm 3 times. So it just helps us to understand what it means. So the psalm just starts here. The psalmist expresses his love for God. I love Yahweh. And the reason why is because he's heard the voice of my supplications. He's inclined his ear. Now notice it, therefore I will call upon him as long as I live. Now notice what it says here. The psalmist has made supplication, but you see why he made supplication. Verse 3, the sorrows of death have compassed me, and the pains of the grave have got hold of me, and I found trouble and sorrow. And that's the spirit of David. It was the spirit of Hezekiah. It's the spirit of the Son of God as well. It's the spirit of those who are going to call upon God for deliverance from sin and death. And then I called upon the name of Yahweh. Oh Yahweh, I beseech thee, deliver my life. And you see then what he says in verse 5, gracious is Yahweh, and he's righteous, and he's full of compassion. So you see, He's calling upon Yahweh to be delivered from death. But he's calling upon the name because he understands the character of the one whom he's calling upon. And we're not told when Abram was made known unto him the character of his God. Not explicitly. But you see here what it means to call upon the name. And you see in verse 13, come over and you think about these words, the echo of them. In verse 13, I will take the cup of salvation, and I'll call upon the name of Yahweh, and I'll pay my vows. Now he says, in the presence of all his people. And then you come down to verse 17. I will offer unto thee the sacrifice of thanksgiving, and I'll call upon thy name. So you see, in the context of the psalm here is to call upon Yahweh for deliverance from death. And when he answers that cry, it's to take the cup of salvation. And then after that, taken to offer the sacrifice of thanksgiving. Wasn't that what we did on Sunday? Isn't that what we did at the memorial meeting on Sunday? When we brought to remembrance that which has been accomplished on our behalf and that we have to call out to be delivered from death in our lives. And when we call upon him, we know who he is. We know what his character is. And we plead with him on the basis of understanding that his character is one of righteousness and of graciousness, stooping down and upholding his righteousness in that offering and the compassion he feels for his offspring. The memorial meeting. The spirit of the memorial meeting. And when you come into the New Testament, and Peter stands up in Acts chapter 2 and he says, look, whosoever calleth on the name of Yahweh shall be delivered. You see, whosoever shall call upon the name of Yahweh shall be delivered. And they said, well, what do we do? He said, well, repent and be baptized into the name of Jesus Christ, and you will receive the remission of your sins. So in that day, that was how they called upon the name. In Abram's day, he's made an altar. It's all the same thing. And so that's what we're really wanting to just build out this idea, and this is where he spread his tent. He spread his tent here, between Bethel and Ai. He's calling upon the name of Yahweh to be delivered from death. And he's offering on the prospect of being delivered, he's offering the sacrifice of thanksgiving and praise. And you think about ourselves, brothers and sisters, you see he spread his tent here. It's just ecclesial life for the seed of Abram. That's what it is, a temporary dwelling place between the house of God and utter ruin. That's where we dwell, in that place. So, of course, on the understanding of that, and the understanding of what Abram's doing there, and what he's been promised, and what he's been told about his seed who will inherit the land, and the basis upon which he's worshipping on the understanding of those things, God says to him, we're just going to test you now on your belief. You see, because in our lives, brothers and sisters, when we come out of the waters of baptism, to be frankly and quite honest, we're not much good for anything. We've just been begotten. We're not much good for the house of God in a certain sense. We're just babes. And so what happens in our lives, of course, we're put to the test. We're going to undergo various trials. That's what Peter says, the trial of your faith. It's more precious than gold that perisheth. This is the trial of your faith and your belief. It's much more precious than gold, because if it's going to be found unto praise and honour and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, it's very precious. And Dr. Thomas says, and also remember, it's the indispensable ordeal of probation. It's how our character is developed. It's where we learn about our deficiencies. It's where we come to understand our failures. And that's what happens here now in Abram and Sarai's life. So what happened? When you come back to Genesis 12 for a moment, what did God do? Well, he said, I can see, I'm just saying this, I can see that you believe I'm a great deliverer. So I'm going to test that with a trial. Now, the thing is that there was a famine in the land. So the trial begins, see, with a famine. Now, I want you to think about that just for a moment, because you see, we often think about Abram and Sarah, and we read the record, and it's Abram did this and Sarah did that, but we forget about all the other people that were involved with them. You know, later on, he's got 300 armed men. They say his encampment was probably about 1,000. And when he comes to buy a burying place for Sarah, he says, you're a mighty prince among us. So when this famine begins, that it's not just affecting Abram himself, it's his responsibility to all those who are in his encampment. And let's just call that for a moment, in a certain sense, the household of faith. So the trial begins. And what I want you to notice, and we don't know this, and I'm not going to say this, but I want you to notice this, that's between Bethel and Bethel, and he calls upon the name of Yahweh in Bethel, and he returns and calls upon the name there, but in the middle, nothing. Absolute silence. It's not recorded, if he did. That's just how it's portrayed. No petition. And you see, that can happen. And you see, what you come to understand, brothers and sisters, is this situation is just not uncommon to ourselves. And you see, it doesn't say there the famine was just a famine. It then says that the famine was a grievous famine. In other words, the land in which he's standing is just bleached. He's got all that stock. All this stock. And you see, the famine itself wasn't the trial. It was a mechanism to tip them into Egypt. That was the trial. And you see, that can happen in our lives. We think, oh, this is the trial. But it's not. It's just a mechanism to tip us into a real trial. That's how it's portrayed here. And notice it says the Canaanite was then in the land. But when they come back up out of Egypt, it says the Canaanite and the Perizzite are dwelling together in the land. They're still there. And you see, what happens is there becomes a problem that we have to face in life. An issue. For all of us, it's just different. And you see, with Abram, And this is the beginning, isn't it? Because you see, we're talking about here the testing of a faith that's just got underway. And maybe he just, panicked. Maybe the situation, you see, because when we go to Psalm 33, it says, "Behold, the eye of Yahweh is upon them that fear him, upon them that hope in his covenant kindness, to deliver their soul from death, and to keep them alive in famine." Yahweh looks upon the earth, and those that fear him, his eye never leaves that individual. It's one of the precious things of the truth of which we've espoused, that's a fact. And he'll keep that person alive in famine. Remember Elijah? It's the brook, the ravens. I mean, here's a famine in the land. But who are we talking about that can deliver from famine? Who? And then they could have remained in the land and trusted in that deliverance, and they would have been abiding in that covenant love. But he didn't go back to where he'd come from. He remained Abram the Hebrew. And so, of course, it says it came to pass, so they went down to Egypt. They make that decision to go down to Egypt. And what that means is, of course, is that we're going to sort the issue out ourselves. We've got an issue to face in life. We'll sort it out ourselves. It happens to us often. In my own life. Problems, what do I do? And I'll do this. Remember Jacob? Manipulate this, manipulate that. But you see, what happens is that they come into Egypt and there's an issue. Well, they come down to enter into Egypt and there's an issue. Because when they came down and bring their flocks and their herds down there, and they bring their encampment down there, they're going to cross into Egypt. You know what's on the border? A fortress. You read about in profane history, about them letting shepherds in from Canaan. There's a famine in the land. Not necessary, Abram. There's a massive fortress there. And in this land, the ruler is treated as a god. When you enter into that land, you've got no citizen rights from Canaan or from wherever. So you see there's an issue here. And this is where Abram makes his first major mistake. He's already made mistakes in a certain sense by choosing to do that. But now he makes a major mistake. And because do you know what happens to him? His faith just drains out of him. And he's left standing on the border of Egypt, bereft of all faith. Do you know why? Because fear has stolen into his heart. Fear has gripped him. And it's the fear of man. They'll kill me. And you see, brothers and sisters, because he hasn't been that way before, in that experiencing that situation, because he hasn't been in that situation before and experienced it and the consequences of what that's going to bring, to recognise the hazardness of that situation, which could be to his life and the life of all those that are with him, because he doesn't recognise the danger that he's in, he asks Sarah to say that she is his sister. That she is his sister. Not knowing where that's going to take them. And you see, this is what happens when the fear of man enters into us when we're of the household. You see what's happened? Faith's gone. Now, when the fear enters in, it skews our reasoning and our judgment. That's what happens. And that's what happens now with Abram. You see what happens? He simply displays his complete lack of faith. He pleads, and this is a positive thing in a way, because this is the first time Abram even speaks in the record. And we can understand what sort of man he is, because he's a man who's responded in the obedience of faith. He's waited until his father has died because of respect for the patriarch in his family at the time. He's been assiduous in gaining substance and souls in Haran. That's the sort of man he is, and you wonder what he's like, and then you go, well, now we see what he is in his relationship with Sarah. He pleads with her. He doesn't tell her to do that, doesn't order her to do that. He pleads with Sarah. But what does he plead her to do? He pleads with her to mislead the Egyptians. And then he defames the Egyptians. He implies to them the worst of motives on the basis of supposition. You know, we're good at that. That's just human nature to a T. We jump to conclusions. This is what our nature is. He compromises Sarah's place and his position as his wife as he removes his public protection from her. Say you're my sister. He then deceives the princes of Egypt. He then receives goods and wealth under false pretensions. He then plunges Pharaoh's house as a consequence of all these actions. He plunges Pharaoh and his household into disaster. And then, if God hadn't intervened, if Yahweh hadn't intervened, he would have lost his life in Egypt. Because when Pharaoh found out that Sarah was married to him, and he had done that to Pharaoh, his life would have been forfeit, and all those with him, he would have been responsible for the loss of life of the whole household. Well, how's that for a day's work? You see, he shifted his tent to AI. Just like that. So easy. So quick. You know what Paul says? I want you to think about this, brothers and sisters. He says this: whatsoever is not of faith, think about it, is sin. That's what it is. If it's not of faith, if it's not faith that's driving your life, it's simply sin. That's what all that was. His faith just drained out of him. And you know, in a certain sense, brothers and sisters, it's a wonderful thing that we've got that in the record. Because you see, we are able to realise that the bar of God for us isn't too high for ourselves. So he doesn't take any time. He has not to meditate upon the promises and to think through the implications of each clause of what he's been told. You know, 7 times he's already been told in Genesis 12, this is going to be about you, and that And he says to Sarah, my soul shall live because of you. I mean, what sort of reasoning is that? His life would be preserved because through him would come the one who would deliver the whole earth. Out of him would spring the nation of Israel. And in him all nations were going to be blessed. But my soul shall live because of you. You can see what happens when faith leaves us. Our reasoning just goes out the window. You see, 1 minute we're in the ecclesia, we're attending all the meetings, we're understanding what we're being told and what we've been given, and we're worshipping on that basis, and God says, I'm going to put you to the test. And the next minute we're on the brink of ruin. So there's Abram. So what about Sarai? Where does she sit in this whole arrangement? And you see, that's what I want to really show you, brothers and sisters. I want to show you this tonight because I think that there's a lesson here that is so incredibly powerful. Because you see, it's Sarai that saves the household in this situation. I just want to show you that here. What we've got on the record here, before we just come to Sarah, I just want to show you this, and I want to show you what I mean by that, is we've got what's called a chiastic structure. Does anyone know what a chiastic structure is? It's a structure in the word, and this is how it works. So here's from Bethel to Bethel. It's a chiastic structure. So you start there at the start and finish, and you see he pitched his tent at Bethel, he builds an altar there, and he calls upon the name of Yahweh. Exactly the same when you come to the end, in the place where you've been at the beginning, between the place there, by the to the place of the altar which he had made at the first, and there he calls upon the name. You see, it's exactly the same. And then you step in, one, Abram journeyed towards the south. It means the Negev. It's down by Beersheba, and south of there. And the other side, Abram went on his journeys from the Negev back to Bethel. Come down one. Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn. Come back this way. Abram went up out of Egypt. You see, that's called a chiastic structure. So you just keep working it into the middle, because in the middle is the lesson. So you come into the next one. Say, I pray thee, you're my sister. Why did you say she was your sister? The woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Yahweh plagues Pharaoh's house. So what's in the centre? What's in the centre? Now we just looked at Abram. Abram's been treated well. That's a problem, isn't it? Until you just look at this, for her sake. And this one, because of Sarai, Abram's wife. You see? Now he didn't plague Pharaoh's house because of Abram. Look at what he'd done. He plagued Pharaoh's house because of Sarai. You see, sisters, in this it was an interesting thing for me, because these talks spring out of Brother Josh Smith saying to me, he's running their Bible class, can you do a series of talks on the development of Abram's faith? I thought, oh yeah, I can do that. But you see, when I came to the record, I came to understand that it's not Abram, it's Abram and Sarai. That's who's in the record. Not just Abram. It's Abram and Sarai together. That's how they come into the record in Genesis chapter 11, and that's how they go out of the record in Genesis 25. There was Abram buried and Sarah his wife. And so their marriage is portrayed in the scripture as a marriage to emulate the New Testament. Their marriage is held up as the marriage, apart from the marriage of the Son of God and his bride. So you see, here's Abram, and he was to learn in this trial that his wife was his counterpart. His wife was his helpmeet. And his wife was equally him in spiritual matters, his equal. And in this situation, more than his equal. You know, in our community, and because of the roles we have to play, often the roles we have to play means the brethren take a prominent role in the ecclesia. And sometimes, therefore, the sisters are sort of considered to be, oh, the sisters do that, or whatever. But you see, not here, and this is something that I can't understand, you see, is that the wonderful person that Sarah was. She was Abram's counterpart for life. She was actually a prophetess at one stage. And you see, that was something that Abram hadn't even yet come to consider or think through in that sense. See, when Abram says he went down to Egypt, but when he went up out of Egypt, it's he and his wife. Just two little words there like that. He and his wife. And Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and gold. Why? Because of Sarai. That's why. Not because of Abram, because of Sarai. And Paul calls her in Galatians 4:26, he calls her Jerusalem, which is above. She's the mother of us all. She's our mother. You will see her here, the mother of us all. You see, Abram didn't really appreciate what it meant to have this woman to his wife. And it's the same for us as we enter into marriage and all sorts of backgrounds and situations that, and he hadn't come to understand the fullness of what marriage was about. And he certainly had no understanding of the role that Sarah was yet to play in the provision of Abram's seed. So the problem comes about, of course, in Egypt because of Sarah's outward beauty. Behold, I know that you are a fair woman to look upon. It means you are of beautiful appearance. In some contexts, oh, how could Sarah be beautiful at that age? Well, the record says that Sarah was beautiful, and that's just that. That's the Spirit's description of Sarah. And when you stop and think about it, it ran in the family. Behold, I know you're a fair woman to look upon. And the Egyptians saw her, and they said, she's very fair. But you know what it said of Rebecca? Of good appearance. That's the same word, of her appearance. You know what Rebecca means? To ensnare with beauty. Isaac had the same problem later, remember? There was something that ran in that family line that produced these women who were extremely good looking. And of course, Jacob. Remember, Jacob, he worked for 7 years for Rachel, and it seemed just like a day because she was of good form and appearance. And then he worked another 7, 14 years for Rachel. And so what happens, of course, she was praised before Pharaoh. And so she was taken into Pharaoh's house. It's in the passive. I mean, she had no say in the matter. She was simply taken. Pharaoh was like a god in Egypt. And then in Rotham's it says, and with Abram dealt he well, with Abram, this is Rotham's, dealt he well for her sake, so that he came to have flocks and herds and asses and men servants and maid servants and asses and camels. He came to have that. It didn't just happen in a day or two. And of course, it tells us in the record there that when he went up, he was rich in silver and gold. When was he given that? So you see, was it just Sarah's beauty? Was it just Sarah's outward beauty? Or was there something else about Sarah that made her absolutely beautiful? And that, of course, is because of her disposition and the way she conducted herself. Let's go, we'll see this, we'll come over to 1 Peter chapter 3. Now, Peter, we just want to come to the record at the end of chapter 3. He's going to use Sarai as an example. But what he's done is he's set forth the Son of God as the greatest example of two things. The greatest example that we can possibly look at in view of submission and sacrifice. There's the Son of God. He submitted to his Father. And because he submitted to his Father, there was a sacrifice made on behalf of others. Submission and sacrifice. And you see, Peter then just says, he sets that example out, and you think about the depth of that example, the depth of it. And then he just says, likewise, like the Son of God, you wives be in subjection to your own husbands. You're going to exhibit the same spirit of submission as the Son of God showed to his Father. It's just a shadow outworking of it in a married couple's life or in the ecclesia. It's simply those two things being outworked and being seen as mimicking the work of the Son of God. And notice what it said, what he said, and then of course he goes over and the page, and it's likewise ye husbands. We're not concerned about Abram there at the moment, and they were heirs together, so of the grace of life. So there was that there. But you see what it says there in verse 1 of it there. It says, likewise, be subject to your own husbands, if they obey not the word. Well, think about Abram and what he's done. That they without a word may be won by the behaviour of the wife. Without a word. There's no record of Sarah ever saying anything in this situation. And Peter's drawing that idea from there. She didn't utter a word, said nothing. And you see what it says there. And so they are looking upon Sarah. He's using her as an example to beholding there reverently, that reverent, chaste behaviour. You see, it's reverent. You see it there, it's got the fear. It's your chaste behaviour with fear. And that idea of fear, of course, is it's the fear or the reverential awe of Yahweh in that person's life. Their awe of the Creator. And that is affecting their way of life. It's impacting upon it. And a person can see that. They can see that behaviour. So she's put in Pharaoh's house. Now what's going on there? You see in verse 3, not the outward adorning. You know, all those women in that harem. You imagine what it was like, all the plaiting of hair and the adorning of gold and what they were going to wear. But you see verse 4, but let it be the hidden man of the heart. There. That in the centre of that behaviour is her husband. Right there in her heart. You see, it says in that it's not, that spirit is not corruptible. It's not corruptible in that sense. It's going to be an abiding spirit. It's not corruptible. And it's the spirit there of meekness. And it's an imperishable quality. Imperishable quality. You know what that means. Of meekness and quietness and the peace that singular relationship brings. Nothing like the world in which we live, is it? Nothing. And then he says in verse 5, this is the holy woman. They trusted, hoped in God. You see, she's in Pharaoh's harem. She's hoping in God. Because she can see, Sarah can see that he is greater than Pharaoh. Far, far greater. Far, far able to deliver. And they being, it says, they adorned themselves being in subjection to their own husbands. And see in verse 6 it says, she obeyed Abram, calling him Lord. But we know that's probably from Genesis chapter 18, but when he asks her to that, say you're my sister, what's she going to do? Got her joking, mate. Did she say that? No. Her spirit was the opposite of all that. And it was based on the fear of Yahweh. So it says there, she was able to do that which was right. And you notice what it says right there in verse 6. It says, you're her daughters. And if you find yourself in a situation like that, you'll do well. You won't be afraid with any terror. That wasn't Abram, was it? That was Sarah. So you see, although Sarah would have had that outward beauty, there was something about her, again, that would have made her outstanding in that place. So you see there, that was her disposition, her reverential awe of God. That's the beginning of wisdom, we're told. In her heart, the hidden man. In her heart, the hidden man. She hoped in God. She was submissive to her husband. Without a word, she yielded obedience. She displayed courage in the face of fear. And she's called holy. She's an holy woman. She did that which was right in the sight. And you see all those things, that you see all those qualities there. You see that there. Can you see Sarai, your mother? And you know what it says there, and this is what Peter says, that this in the sight of God was of great price. He looks down in Egypt, and in the middle of Egypt, in Pharaoh's house, there was something there that was of great price. So he plagued Pharaoh's house and his household with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And so as a consequence of that, they were thrust out of Egypt. Yeah. Pharaoh commands Abram to come up. And of course, there's only two speeches there. There's Abram's speech to Sarah and there's Pharaoh's speech. And you can imagine Abram going up to that palace before that king, and he rips him to shreds. What have you done? And why did you do this? What have you done to me? Because you see, God had touched Pharaoh. If Yahweh hadn't touched Pharaoh, they would have been, Abram and his household would have been dead. Now, he would have slain them, but he touches Pharaoh with a great plague. And his household, he puts his finger on Pharaoh and his household. And you see, so Pharaoh can't really do anything, can he, in that sense, but he does rip Abram to shreds in that sense for what he's done. You can read it in the language. And they're thrust out of Egypt. And of course, Abram goes back. And you notice what it says. Come back to Genesis 12, brothers and sisters. I'm just going to show you this just for a moment, because the record, you read it, and it's just the small words. It's the small words, and we're reading it, we just go over them, and it's the small little words. But you see what it says there in chapter 13. It says he went on his journeys from the south, where to? To Bethel. That's what the record says. He went to Bethel. But he didn't. He went to the place between Bethel, where the altar was before. But the record says no. He went back to Bethel. He went from ruin back to the house of God. And can you imagine then when he calls upon the name of Yahweh there at the altar, when he's calling upon him now to be delivered from death, that God says to him, well, you said before that you believed I could deliver you from death. Can you see that now? I did when you went down into Egypt. I delivered you from death because of Sarai. And I was thinking about that, brothers and sisters, when it came for Abram later on, and he sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac. This whole chapter, all this detail about finding a wife for Isaac. Think, why is Abram going to such, all this thing? Because you see, he's learned something in Egypt, hasn't he, about what a good wife is like. And he says to us then, take 10 camels. Where'd they come from? I remember something that happened to me because of my wife. So, what does that mean? And here's the lesson, brothers and sisters, and it's extremely powerful lesson. It's very powerful. You see, what happens to us in the truth is we understand the gospel and we're baptized and we begin our walk. And we stay the course. We continue in it. And as we continue in it and remain in it, calling upon God, our understanding starts to come. And what happens, of course, is that everything starts to become a reality. The offering of the Son of God is just a reality. It's just a substance of your life. It's what your life has become about. Nothing else. Nothing else matters. And it sinks down into your bones. Just becomes what you are and are becoming. And you see, the lesson for us is this, is on what basis were they delivered from Egypt, from imminent death? Sarai, who is not just the sister, but it's the brother and sister, it's all of us alike, we're all the bride of Christ. We're all the bride of Christ. It doesn't matter whether we're male or female. We're all the bride. And you know what delivered Sarai, the bride of Christ, out of Egypt? The hidden man of the heart. That's what. The hidden man of the heart. And for us, that's the Son of God. That's who the hidden man of the heart is. It's the Son of God. Paul says in Ephesians that Christ might dwell in your hearts by faith. And we've been to hundreds and hundreds of memorial meetings. And slowly it comes upon you and overshadows your life and starts becoming everything that your life's about. And he begins to dwell in your heart in that sense. If any man love me, well, who wouldn't love him? Look what he's done for us. No one else could accomplish what he accomplished in his life. He's the captain and the author and finisher of our faith. We look to him in that sense, our immortal high priest. If any man love me, he will keep my words. And that's what we do. We try our best to do that. And my Father will love that person, and we will make our abode with him or her. The hidden man of the heart. So, brothers and sisters, there's some thoughts out of this section here. So just some lessons, for ourselves. And that is just three things. Abram, by experience, would come to recognise, because of what he experienced, that when faith departs, for whatever reason, we're simply left to our own resources. He learned that by experience, so he could recognise it in his life and know the danger that would occur in his life if he let that happen to him again in any form. That's experience. That which is not of faith is sin. We live our lives by faith. That's what impels us forward, but often we're not thinking about it. And when we're not thinking about it, it's just us. And that's sin. Abram and Sarah both had to learn this, provide things honest in the sight of all men. Oh, this is, you're a contractor, this is one of the most difficult things to do. I've got, known around town for not keeping my word. A lot of it for years, because I'll be there and you don't turn up. Suddenly you start to realise, I can't do that anymore. It says here you've got to provide things honest in the sight of all men. You learn a lesson of how you have to behave. And they had to learn that lesson. You can't set out to deceive and hope that it's going to work. And then, of course, this last one here, and I think it's the most powerful. What delivers from ruin and death? It's the hidden man of the heart. That's what's going to deliver us. Because remember, it says it's an incorruptible spirit. And you see, brothers and sisters, that's something that we can all work towards in our own lives. We attend the memorial meeting. Let's do that out of habit. We've been going to hundreds of memorial meetings. What are we having for lunch? Oh, what are they wearing over there? Have you not they're doing? When we go, we have to be engaged. And we all are. I'm not saying that. We're all subject to those things, all of us. We're all subject to it. We're all human. That's what being human is. That's not our crime. It's our misfortune. It's only a crime when we don't apply in our lives what God's given us. So there's a few thoughts, brothers and sisters, and the hymn I've chosen for that, and you'll understand it. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see our God. The secret of the Lord is theirs. Their heart is Christ's abode.